Well, hello and welcome. My name is Lindsay Smith. I am an author and a publisher. And today I will be interviewing author Kristen Carter. Kristen is a certified coach and the author of I Speak: How to Stand Up for Yourself and Have Difficult Conversations. She's been in private practice since 2009, working with businesses, schools, and individual clients. Welcome, Kristen. Thank you for being here and allowing me to interview you today.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. I'm excited about this. It's really fun.
Yeah, so first question I have for you, can you explain the title of your book? What is I Speak?
Yeah, ISPEAQ is an acronym. This process that I developed for having difficult conversation has 6 parts. And I'll go into them in a little more detail later. But the first part is to be clear on your intention. S is for a suitable time and place for a difficult conversation. P is having a positive outlook and a peaceful demeanor. E is citing an explicit example of something that you don't like, that you want to change. A is how you were adversely affected by it. And Q is where you ask for what you want next. It sort of stands for requests and requirements. And then finally, the Q stands for questions, so that you don't just deliver this whole monologue and then the thing stops. It actually becomes a conversation.
Nice. So what inspired you to for this idea of I Speak? What inspired you to write it and to talk about it and to help people have these difficult conversations in the first place?
Well, standing up for myself was always difficult for me. I didn't learn how to do it at home. My parents didn't have difficult conversations, at least not in our company. When they seemed upset about something, my dad would go to work or he would go golfing. My mom would go quiet or she'd get passive aggressive. And that's the role model I had for how you convey when you're unhappy about something. But as I grew into adulthood and then became a coach, I realized lots of my clients were struggling with this too. And it seemed like a kind of a common problem. So I did a real deep dive into what it takes to stand up for yourself. Why don't we? How do people get it right? And I came across some really interesting stuff in the field that's called nonviolent communications, which is a process used to mediate between people who are like at war with one another. So it's a mediation technique. And I turned it into this little tool. Over time, it developed, and I just found it really helpful. And then when lockdown hit and my coaching and my outreach to people in person was really curtailed, my son said to me, you know what, you should turn I Speak into a book. It's something that I had taught him and my daughter as well, and that they had found useful. And so I did.
Okay, so in thinking of, speaking up for yourself, there's so many instances, like not just in relationships or business associates or, in your career, but little things like when people go to a restaurant and they get the wrong dish. So many people have debilitating anxiety and they just kind of suck it up because they don't want to say, hey, you did, this thing's wrong, I would like the right one. They feel really bad about it. Or even if you want to return, like people feel bad returning things to stores. you know so what I'm just curious, like your thoughts on that, and what, how I Speak maybe helps people with some of these issues that we deal with in our day-to-day life.
I do have thoughts. I think there are several reasons why people struggle to speak up for themselves. I already mentioned not having a role model for it. Um, and some of us, it comes from culture, culture, not big C culture, like arts and painting, but small C culture, like where we're from and what's acceptable and what isn't. And that comes from our families, it comes from our religions, it comes from our, societies and stuff. And there are, I know there are places where women aren't encouraged, especially, to speak up for themselves. Better seen than, but be seen but not heard
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
a thing. Don't cause a fuss, whatever you do. And if our parents had that kind of anxiety, we can pick it up too. But there are also some people who are just born with more sensitive nervous systems, for instance, who really feel the anxiety, and they're not willing to get into a confrontation. And there are people who are really empathic, and empaths tend to take on the feelings of other people. So if you think that by returning your food, you are going to upset the waiter or anybody else at your table, you'll take that on, and then you'll feel bad about it. And that makes people sort of suck up their thoughts as well. There are a lot of reasons, and they're real reasons. I think there are three kinds of ways that we stop ourselves from talking, right? And I call them types of people: barriers, blurters, and blabbers. The barriers just keep it all in, and that may just be their coping mechanism. The blurters are people who've maybe tried to have difficult conversations in the past, and it went so badly that they're afraid to again. And what they do instead is wait until they just can't hold it in anymore, and then they just blurt. And this sucks, I hate it, take it back. And then they feel so embarrassed about it that they swear they'll never do it again. And then the blabbers are folks who, once they get started talking about what bothers them, they go on, while I'm at it, there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this. And that kind of piling on to somebody else is so ineffective that it usually doesn't lead to any positive change. And so they may decide, I'm not even going to start.
And I imagine we could probably be at some points all three.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like,
it's when the
guilty.
it's when the barriers can't take it anymore that they blurt. Mm-hmm. And once they start blurting, they might blab. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I think I've been guilty of that a time or two.
Oh, we all have. But the thing that's really at the root of all this is that our social connections are so important to us that we don't want to jeopardize them. Mm-hmm. That's really the main thing that keeps us buttoned up. Mm-hmm. The downside of that is that we then live with things that we're unhappy about at work, in our relationships, in our marriages. Even with our kids, I think we're afraid sometimes to say how we're really feeling because we don't want to harm their little egos. And so, it's wired into us to want our relationships to be safe. But we do that sometimes at the expense of our own happiness. Mm-hmm. So that's really what I want to empower people to do with this, is to advocate for themselves so that they can change the things that don't work for them.
Yeah. It made me think of online conversations, or online, with being able to post how you feel in many ways. So what, without putting you on the spot a little bit, but what do you think about communication where it's like that, like on a more public platform versus one-on-one? Does your method, does ISPEAQ work within that? Or do you encourage people to, if they want to have that difficult conversation, to have it with that person before going publicly? Or what does, is it kind of case by case basis? I just see a lot of people air their frustrations out online. It's easy to do that. And I'm curious your take on it.
I think it's easier to blurt online because that you don't have immediate ramifications. Mm-hmm. You can say the things that might be upsetting to somebody in a one-on-one, but if you feel, safe at home in front of your computer, or safe in your car in front of your phone, or wherever, it's easier to say more controversial things. Mm-hmm. But I would, of course, encourage, and this goes back to intention, which is what the I stands for. Sometimes your intention is to build a relationship. And in that case, ISPEAQ is a useful tool. If your intention is not relationship building, if it's airing your grievances, then you just do whatever you want to. ISPEAQ isn't really a tool for you anyway. But if you are someone who cares about the outcome of your conversation, in terms of the relationship part, then ISPEAQ is a useful tool, and you can use it just as easily online, because it does boil down to knowing what you want to convey, knowing what you want out of the relationship with the other person, and then just saying, this specific thing happened, and this is how I feel about it. You know, when you say that, it makes me feel frustrated, or, you know, something can be as simple as that. It's just expressing how you feel about something that happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can do that just as easily online as you can in person.
I also think that a lot of people online tend to, like you said, you know, just blurt something out or say something. But if you actually talk with that person one on one, it could be a different experience. I've had several people in my life where I've even prejudged them based on things that I see that they post. And then
Sure.
you meet them, and if you have a conversation, you realize, okay, there can be some commonality here. And we could have a conversation, where sometimes just seeing that initial reaction that they post, you know, could maybe, you could think of it in like taking them the wrong way or out of context. So I think it's really interesting. And I think, like you said, it goes back to intention, you know, and what you want that relationship to be. If it's just someone you don't care about, then I don't know what you recommend, but you could just probably, okay,
Might
like,
as well flirt.
yeah, it's not important to me. But if it is a relationship that you care about, then, you know, the I speak method seems, you know, really great to actually communicating effectively.
Yeah. You bring up something interesting, and I'm riffing here, so I don't know where this is going to go exactly, but it's about assumptions. You know, the assumptions that we make about other people, and who we decide they are before we engage with them. And also, I think we make assumptions about the importance of things like returning a dish in a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it is not the end of the world to send food back, and waiters make mistakes, and it can just be a fact that the wrong dish was delivered. It doesn't have to be loaded with emotion,
Mm-hmm.
which we sometimes put on it if we feel anxious about speaking up for ourselves. You know, we assume that it's going to be a lot worse than it is.
That's something my therapist tells me all the time, is she's like, what are the facts? And we
Mhm.
even just break it down like that. Well, the facts are, I asked for no mayonnaise, mayonnaise on it.
Uh-huh.
Like, those are the facts. Like, it's a mistake. We all make mistakes, and that's it. Like, but if you're, like you said, sensitive or an empath, you're like, oh, but maybe they're having a bad day, and, you know, I
It'll
don't,
cause trouble for the kitchen.
yeah, and like it's wasting food, and I should, you know, I'm the one that needs to get over it. Like, you put all this blame on yourself, and then, you know, you take on the energy of others. Whereas if you kind of take a step back and you look at the facts, you're like, oh, well, it's everyone may, if I did, and then I think, I don't know, like, this is something I do, but I'm like, if I made a mistake, if someone asked for no mayonnaise and I put mayonnaise on it, I would want to correct it. You know,
Right.
I'd be
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm so sorry I made this mistake, so why don't I give that same grace back to myself in this situation, you know?
I love that, giving grace back to yourself. I think there's another important thing here, which I think is at the root of why I wanted to write this book. And that is whether or not we think we deserve something, right? Why does a person who doesn't ask for their sandwich to not have mayonnaise, do they not feel that they deserve to have a sandwich without mayonnaise? It's kind of a helpless mindset in a way.
Mhm.
And I think we all deserve to speak up for them, for ourselves. You know, there are major religions and societies that would disagree with me. I'd love to change that, but that's outside my purview. But I do think we have a right to inner peace, right? We have a right to live our lives in a peaceful manner. And in order to do that, we might have to say, something's not working for me.
Mhm.
You know, if I eat mayonnaise, I break out in hives. I'm not willing to have that. Or the taste, you know, the feel in my mouth makes me gag. It's, you know, you deserve to have the things within reason that you want.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that.
And so it's partly, what I'm partly what I'm partly hoping that people get out of reading the book is a sense that they deserve to speak up for themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a real, I guess, like basic human right in a way.
It feels so as an American, but
Yeah.
I read somewhere recently that Europeans are sometimes appalled at the way an American in a restaurant will say, "This isn't medium rare," or say that they're unhappy with something. And so culturally, it is more like them to say, "Oh, it was just a mistake. I'll suck it up," or something kinder.
Mhm.
And so it does really depend on where you are and who you're with.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously there are people that just want to complain to complain. You're going to have that, like in any sort of customer service situation. I think like my takeaway from a lot of this is just kind of checking in with your emotional self. Like if you're like, why do I resist wanting to speak up for this? And maybe, I don't know if you have any insight there, but I think that resistance can probably teach you something about yourself and ways that maybe you want to show up and speak up more, even on little things, such as that. Or even the other day, I went shopping and they rung up my shoes wrong. And it was a situation where my husband was like, "Oh, just don't worry about it. It was a couple dollars." And I'm like, "Yeah, but it was a couple dollars. Like I, like I want that back." And I know I read the sign. I know that it was the exact one because I made sure. If I made the mistake, I'm happy to admit that I made a mistake and read it wrong. But I at least like to know and find out. And just like little nuances like that. But I think you know, it's this, to me, it's like, what emotional thing is coming up for you? And I don't know if you have any insights on that, because I think that could be really helpful for people.
I think so too. Self-awareness is key here. It's a process that helps you choose the words, to simply to articulate what you're feeling. But getting to know why you hold yourself back can only be a good exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something I learned from my mother? So what are the facts of the situation? Like you said before, is that something that I really believe is true? It's kind of questioning your thoughts around something. Thoughts, emotions, behavior are so intertwined. So why the behavior is I'm varying. The emotion connected with it might be shame or fear or anxiety. And the thought might be, I can't, I shouldn't. So yes, breaking that stuff down can really help. And then and once identification or awareness is the first step for behavior change, right? Then you can take steps to say, try that a little bit. I'm not suggesting that by reading this book, you are all of a sudden going to be the greatest communicator in every setting, but it can teach you how, and you can take it step by step.
Mm-hmm.
Start with a little tiny thing, even in your own head, to say, oh, that happened. And how do I feel about that? I feel frustrated. I feel, and so that even to yourself, you begin naming the emotions around the things that you deal with in life.
Mm-hmm. Even times when you say to yourself, "Ah, I wish I would have said something," that can teach
Uh-huh.
you a lot too. When
Yeah,
you're in those situations and you're like, "Ah, I really wish I just spoke up for myself," and remembering those times, because that can teach you something as well.
that's a really great point. And there are some blank pages at the back of the book where you could write down those times where you think, because you always come up with the great one-liners later while you're falling asleep or something. But to write down those conversations where you think, here's how I could have done that differently.
Mm-hmm.
And we are all learning all the time. Life is a work in progress that we make up as we go along. There are ways to become better at something incrementally. And I think part of the importance of that, there's this wonderful book that was written by an Australian hospice carer. She wasn't a nurse, but she cared for men and women in their last days and weeks of life. And the book she wrote was The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And Bronnie Ware is her name. I want to give her credit for this. But the 2 of the top 5 regrets of people who are about to lose their lives relate to speaking up for yourself. One of them is, I wish I had had the courage to live a life true to myself rather than the one others expected of me. And the second is, I wish I'd had the courage to express my thoughts and feelings. Well, if you can express your thoughts and feelings, you can live a life more true to yourself instead of the one others expect from you. I think they're just totally interlinked. And that's what I'd like to see, is people who are living currently and then able to reflect back one day on how they conducted their lives and feel like they really honored themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and not the opposite. I think that's such a pity.
Yeah, that's so true. And so hopefully that makes people just think about your own life. I mean, wanting to not have that regret later on is so important. And I think it comes to those subtle ways, like the subtle ways that we've learned or been conditioned over time that we don't even realize are kind of happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so
Mm-hmm.
subtle. And then before you know it, one day you're like, you know, not eating. I keep going back to this mayonnaise sandwich, but
It's a
probably,
great example.
but one day you're, throwing away the mayonnaise sandwich because you can't eat it or allergic to it because you couldn't speak up for yourself, um, and that's such a like a small, minute thing in the grand scheme of life, but over time, it's not just that; it's something else, and it's your relationships.
Well, right. If you can't ask for a sandwich without mayonnaise, can you ask for a different job? Can you ask for your partner to stop being such a slob? Can you, advocate for the big stuff if you can't advocate for the little stuff? And I hate to take people to a dark place without lightening things up afterwards. But if you were to imagine that tomorrow you're in a hospital bed, and this happened millions of times last year with people who got COVID, who were otherwise healthy, merrily living their lives. And all of a sudden they had to think, wow, if this is it, how do I feel about what I've done and where I am right now?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can take yourself to that place just for a minute and think, if that happened tomorrow, what would be the things that you really feel like you wish you had shifted? What would you have wanted to get yourself out of? What would you have wanted more of or less of? And then shake it off and look around and be super grateful that you still have the opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think if there's anything that has taught us, it's that perspective shift, be able to
Yeah.
look at things and realize more what makes you happy and what lights you up, and what do you want to be doing, as opposed to what you should be doing or what people tell you or the things that you've maybe fallen into. I think in my opinion, I speak is just as much a method as it is in many ways like a lifestyle. Like, how do you want to show up in this world and be and live and you know choose in that way, as opposed to the alternative.
Yeah. I love that. I myself struggled a lot with confidence growing up. I tried to fit in with everybody else, thinking if I could be like everybody else, I would be liked by everybody else.
Mhm.
And as a result of that, I wound up not being true to myself. And so it's been a long journey, learning coaching and teaching coaching, teaching coaching tools and processes to other people has been a way for me to become incredibly peacefully confident in myself. And this is one of the tools I use to help me get there.
Mhm.
And in my relationship with my husband, it's been fantastic. I married a guy that I met overseas and agreed to, and he proposed to me 8 days after we met, which is a cool love story. But it also meant that here I was with somebody that I didn't know very well, that I felt like I had to accept, lock, stock, and barrel. And that if there was anything that I didn't like or appreciate, about the way we were interacting with each other, I couldn't say anything because I had already said yes.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to screw it up either. He's a wonderful guy. We've now been married almost 30 years. So what I needed to do was learn to ask for what I wanted in a way that preserved the relationship as much as I possibly could.
Mhm.
And yes, I blabbered, and yes, I blurted, and yes, I buried. But as time's gone on, I've become more and more and more proficient in doing this.
Mhm. And I
Less like my mom and my grandmother. In a way, I feel like I'm kind of breaking a maternal cycle in this, because I know they both learned, they both put up with a lot of stuff that I never would. And in having taught this to my daughter, I feel like we're, shifting towards something that's far more constructive and positive
Mhm.
for us.
Absolutely. And I think, it can be said for, you know, m- uh, like the paternal side too, where, oftentimes men are taught to bury their feelings and not talk about them. And, and also watching the women in their life, like you said, like your family can give them a perspective on what what their partner should communicate like, or
Mhm.
so I think it's really helpful to really coming down to communication, but being able to have this tool, like you said, to break those cycles and to shift them on both sides, because I
Right.
think we learn through watching how we're raised, all of these different factors.
I think, if you were in a relationship that really matters to you and you can both learn to do this, it's baby steps, but it can make such a difference, because when you can convey how you feel and what you need, the other person can respond. And
Mhm.
when they can tell you how they feel and what they need, you can respond. And, done properly, you can just build these tiny little steps that make you stronger, stronger, stronger,
Mhm. I love
and
that.
more authentic. And you can feel safe being authentic.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. What Okay, so take us through the I speak, like how it works. Like can you maybe give us a quick overview of going through it, and then maybe we can do an example, because I feel like that would be really helpful for people.
Yes. And now I want to use the one about the mayonnaise sandwich. But what I've
Just to let you know, I do not like mayonnaise, so that's why that was
so
front of
that
that.
was the real thing.
Yes, that's a real thing.
Yeah. So this is how it works. The quick overview is you clarify your intentions. You think about what you want personally and what you want for the relationship. And when you know that, then you know what you want out of the conversation, right? So there's a kind of big picture intention. Where do I want to go with this person? And the little intention of the conversation, where do I want to go with these words I'm about to speak, right? The next the S is choose the right time and place for it. Don't do it when you're in rush hour traffic and somebody's just honking at you, and that's the wrong time. When emotions are high and you can be interrupted by other things, that's the wrong time to have it. That said, sometimes you want to speak up on the fly. You're not going to bury this whole thing, but when you speak up on the fly, you can still use the other bits of this process. P is to open the conversation in a positive way. Like, be peaceful in your own body. If you're all hyped up and stuff, you tend to get anxious, and your thinking brain kind of goes blitz, and your emotional brain takes over. So try to approach it in a way that you have positive feelings about the other person. What are their strengths? What do you love about them? What do you admire about them? Something like that. And then you're peaceful in your own body. E is give an explicit example. Don't say, when you always put mayonnaise on my sandwiches. You say, this sandwich has mayonnaise on it. And I asked for it not to have mayonnaise, right? That's so explicit. The other person can't argue about whether it's true or not. You want to say something that's so unarguable that that doesn't become the point of the conversation. And then you just say, how were you adversely affected by that? How did that specific thing make you feel? How mayonnaise adversely affects me is I will break out in hives if I eat it. That's, which is also a fact. They can't argue with that either. You can also say, it makes me feel frustrated, or it makes me feel like I'm not seen or heard. It, totally depends on the situation, but that's what happens next. And then you ask for what you want instead. May I please have the same exact thing, just without mayonnaise? Another example I have is, so here's how not to do it is, let's say, and this is not a true story in my house, thankfully, but you live with somebody who's a slob. They leave their stuff all over the place. How not to do it is, hey, butthead, you've done it again, which is a sweeping generalization. Your stuff is everywhere and I cannot stand it anymore. I just got to get out of here. Because that doesn't leave the other person anything to do other than be defensive. And then you don't make any progress whatsoever. And he is probably even more determined then to leave his dirty socks out, maybe on your pillow. People fight back, right? We defend ourselves. So a way to do that is, okay, so my intention is that I'm going to stay in this relationship. I love this guy. My intention is also to not have to pick up after him, right? So that's the intention. And this conversation that I want to have is going to be specifically about these socks that are lying right here. So a good setting for it would be when you're both there in the bedroom, the kids are away, it's quiet, and the P part, starting in a positive frame of mind, take a deep breath and say something like, honey, I don't want to start an argument. I love you and I want there to be as little stress in our lives as possible. We have so much stress. But explicit example, these clothes here lying on the floor 2 feet from the hamper, they cause me stress. Sometimes I feel like you don't care about our shared space very much. That can even, you might even not want to say that much, but this causes me stress. And it doesn't feel very fair because I have to pick up kid socks too. And with you, I want us to share the responsibility for keeping the home in shape, right? This is getting to the Q part now, what you request. We both have jobs and kids and friends, and it seems fair that we both pitch in. Please, could you put your stuff in the laundry basket instead of on the floor? And there you've given it your best shot. I maybe blabbed a little there. There was probably more said there than needed to be said. But you sort of catch the gist of it. It's not taking anger. It's taking a desire for something shared. Maybe bring curiosity to it. You did this earlier. You mentioned something about this earlier. Come to it with curiosity instead of judgment. Mm-hmm. And then, will it always work? Not necessarily. Just because you followed a good process doesn't guarantee that you'll be able to change the other person's thoughts or feelings or behavior. Mm-hmm. Because we don't have control over that. But what we do have control over is the words that come out of our mouths and whether or not we say them. Mm-hmm. Whether we choose to speak up for ourselves and how we do it.
Yeah. For someone that, I love that example. And for someone that I could see right now, maybe would have a harder time, having this conversation, like seeing that, seeing the socks on the floor and getting frustrated and not wanting to, rock the boat and, but like having that pent up energy. Would you recommend maybe a first step, like in your book, you recommend like the end pages, there's things to write. Would you recommend maybe writing those feelings down and using like even going through like for someone that maybe really needs to process it before they have the conversation?
Absolutely. There's a blank worksheet in the book there are those notes pages at the back. And then on my website, I have a downloadable version of the worksheet. And yes, I think it's a brilliant way to start. Start where you feel super safe, which is at least which is just with yourself.
Mhm.
So at least you start to clarify for yourself, you know, oh, I have the freedom, the ability to clarify my own feelings about this and what I want. You know, for somebody who doesn't even feel that they have those things, writing it out for themselves can be a wonderful, empowering way to begin.
Mhm. I
And,
could
you know, and yeah, work it up from there. You know, be ready for when the situation does arise again. You know, maybe you practice all by yourself so that when it comes up, you're ready for what you say and to do it calmly.
I could see this being like the worksheet alone being such a great tool for in the workplace. You know, there's so many times where maybe I don't know, I'm just going to use this example. You're trying to get the company's opinion about, you know, a new thing, and you know that people are going to come to it, you know, a new policy, for example, and maybe instead of a work from home policy, they're going to require people to go into the office. And
Right.
if you've been working from home, you may enjoy that and like it, and it really works for you. So maybe even something this is a tool companies could even use when they implement things or they're thinking about implementing things, to even just have people fill out, like, you know, how they feel about it, but in a constructive way, rather than just like, here's a sheet, let us know how you feel. Because of course you're going to have people that are like, you're terrible, I hate this, you know. But if you help people work through it and process it, I think it's helpful for the person. And then also the company, the people that are making the decisions, I think it's helpful feedback to get so that they can understand where people's intentions are coming from.
I love that idea. And having worked for a long time in the corporate world, and in fact in the employee satisfaction space, among others, I know that people feel afraid to voice how they feel. They're afraid of the repercussions from their colleagues or their bosses about what they think and what they feel. And there are some examples in the book. There are lots of examples in the book of how this is used in different places, from a roommate situation to uh, a racist situation and workplace stuff. But yeah, I love the idea of just using this as a feedback form almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be way more constructive, I feel. And I think it's beneficial for both parties, because it's easy if you're not the one impacted by a decision, right? Like that a company may implement or want to implement, it's easy for you to kind of brush that off. But if it's impacting, you know, the people in your company, then you would want to know, but not just like, here's me complaining on a sheet, you know,
Mhm. Yeah.
or even I see this happen too with organizations that I've worked with um, in different capacities, where people will not do that, and then they get that pent up anger, and then it comes directed at like a staff meeting, you know,
Mhm.
instead of just being like, hey, using the ISPEAQ method. Instead, it's just weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and finally someone's just like gets an attitude with you. And this probably could have been prevented, you know, with some of the proper communication tools.
Right. And you know what employees do when they're super unhappy and they've buried their thoughts and feelings for the long time, they just leave,
Yeah.
you know? And so you've got to replace that person and train up somebody new. And as a way of retaining staff, being able to hear what they think and feel, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that.
The other use that I'm so pleased that I was able to teach this to my two kids. And I taught it to them when they were in adolescence. And all of a sudden, the kids that they'd been really friendly with before were doing some weird stuff or changing their personalities, their hormones, their all the stuff. And they have both said that, and they took the worksheet. They worked it through, and they both say it has helped them in relationships. And that to me is 100% of a win.
Yeah, that's amazing. You got those mom points.
Yeah, I'll have to send them this recording to remind them.
Yeah, remember what I taught you?
Uh-huh.
I love that. Well, as we wrap up, I want to ask you if people take any like one or two things away from this conversation today and the I Speak method, what should that be? What are the one or two things that you really want people to know and to walk away with?
I think one is in terms of the tool itself, the ISPEAQ tool itself, is to just practice the EA bit. Practice noticing what happens and how it triggers you. And if you're going to convey anything to anybody, use a specific, really explicit example and say how it made you feel. That is a really core part of the process. So I'd say at least start there. And then in a bigger picture way, I would say your life is your own. You got one, and make it as good for you as you possibly can.
Mm-hmm. I love that. You're always such a delight and an inspiration, and just your outlook on life is so refreshing, and you've been through so many different things and experiences, and I always love just chat. I could chat with you all day about all the things.
Back at you. Exactly. Feel exactly the same way.
So, last question, where can people get this amazing worksheet? Because I know people are going to want to download that. Where can people find your book and learn more about you? And also, you have an amazing newsletter. I'm just going to say that because I receive it. So where can people do all of the things and find more about what you have going on?
My website is kcarter.com, KCARTER.com. And on the menu bar of the website, there's book, and that'll take you right to ISPEAQ, which will tell you a little bit more about it and also allow you to download the worksheet. And they can buy the book on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble, or if they're overseas, anywhere from bookdepository.com.
Nice.
Thank you for asking.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was amazing. I feel like I learned something every time we chat.
You're so
selfishly
nice.
Selfishly, this was great for me. And yeah, I'm just so thankful, and I hope everyone enjoyed this presentation, and I hope that you use the I Speak method. Check out Kristen's materials, download that worksheet, take it to your office, share it with your friends, share it with your partner. And I really hope these tools help you, because I know that they've, even just from working on this book, they've helped me. I constantly go back to them. So I know that you will find such, joy using them, and they can really transform how you communicate. So all that to say, Kristen, you're amazing. Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching. Check out Kristen at kcarter.com and go buy her book.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful experience, and best wishes to all of you.
Bye.
Bye.